This is a review of the Minolta Maxxum 7000i, a camera that was introduced in 1988 as an update to the Model 7000, which was introduced in '85. That model was the camera that introduced the world to autofocus, manual wind, and automated picture capture. This updated model bumped up the shutter speed, top flash speed, and had a body with rounded edges and a dedicated flash. So this is my friend Brenda's camera. Thanks, Brenda, for letting me borrow your camera to do the camera review. I'm going to go over the controls of the camera, show you what's inside the viewfinder, talk about my likes and dislikes, and a little bit about the history of the camera. We're going to start off on the top plate right side, where you're going to find some familiar controls as well as a control that I've never seen before on a film camera. First up, you have the shutter release button. Nothing fancy or out of the ordinary here. And right in front of it is a control named the up-down control that you actually nudge to the left or rightward direction for selecting various functions of the camera. Moving in a counterclockwise direction, you have a button labeled P for program mode. This button allows you to put the camera in program mode, where the camera picks the shutter speed and aperture. Also, if you have changed the default program settings for exposure compensation, frame advance, and focus mode, the button is a shortcut to set all the settings back to default. To the right of the P button, you have the first of two controls on the camera that have the name Function in them. This one is the Function Selector button. You use it to select between exposure compensation, frame advance, and focusing settings. The button to the right of the Function Selector button is a button I have never seen before on a film camera. It is the Card button. You use this button to use the camera's creative expansion cards. I will go through this later in the video review. Above the function and card buttons, you have a large display that is tilted toward the photographer. In it, across the top, you have the shutter speed and aperture. Across the middle, you see manual focus indicator, exposure modes, self-timer, battery, film load indicator, and frame counter. At the bottom, you see the exposure compensation indicators, film advance mode indicator, which is single shot or continuous 3 frames per second, focus area indicator, and the card in use indicator. Moving to the left side of the top plate, you see the control for turning on the camera with positions for lock, which is off, on, and on with sounds for specific functions on the camera. Above the on-off control are two buttons. Top left is the second button with the name Function in it. It is the Function Adjustment button. You use this one along with the up-down control to change most of the settings on the camera. To the right of this button is the Mode button. You use this button with the up-down control to switch between shutter, aperture, and manual modes. On the front plate right side, you see a really nice hand grip and a focus assist light for low light conditions. And on the front plate left side, you have three controls. Top to bottom, you have a button for setting the aperture when in manual mode. Below that, there is a lens release button, and below that, there is the auto manual focus selector control. It's interesting to note that this camera has only two positions, autofocus and manual. Most cameras that did autofocus from this era had continuous focus for tracking moving objects and single servo focus for just focusing once and locking in the shot. This one automatically would detect if the subject was moving and switch to follow focus mode. And around the side you have the back release. Looking at the back side, left to right, you have the film canister view window, the spot meter button, and a door you open for setting up additional features of the camera. Opening the door, you see top to bottom buttons for self-timer, ISO, film rewind, and card adjustment. You also see a control at the bottom that allows you to eject the card. There's not much to see on the bottom plate. There's a battery door on the left and a tripod socket in the middle. Hold down the mode button and use the up-down control to select between shutter priority, aperture priority, and manual mode. And to get back into program mode, you have to hit the P button. To use the Creative Card system, you insert the card into the side door of the camera in this manner. Then when you turn on the camera, you see the card indicator in the display. To adjust the settings on the card, you use the card adjustment button in the bottom of the door and the up-down buttons. Each card has different settings you are adjusting. From my research, there are about 13 different cards that add various features to the camera. Here is a list of some of them. You can leave the card in the camera and deactivate it by pressing the card button. Looking in the viewfinder, you see across the bottom left to right the focus achieved indicator, the focus area indicator, the shutter speed, exposure compensation indicator, and the aperture. Looking in the viewfinder straight ahead, you see two wide brackets which signify the wider focus area, and if you use the function menu to select the center function area, it uses this box in the center. Around that you see a circle which signifies the spot meter area when in spot meter mode. Now I'm going to talk about my likes and dislikes of the camera. The first under the likes category is the ergonomics of the body. It is a very nice camera to hold and to shoot with. It's got this great hand grip on the front, and on the back it's got a thumb area that just hugs your thumb. So it fits in the hand great. It is made of plastic, and typically that's usually a dislike of mine. But plastic makes the camera very light. So that's, in this case, I think a positive. The next thing I really like about this camera is the metering systems. There's two. There's a matrix meter as well as a spot meter. And in addition to that, because of the card system, there's a card where you can do multi-spot metering, and the camera will figure out what your exposures should be and will be for your next picture based on you taking these multiple spot meters. None of my other cameras have that. So that is pretty awesome. The next thing I really like is this built-in lens cap. That's cool. I don't think any of my other cameras have that either. So that is a very cool thing. Another thing I really like about this camera, and most of my electronic cameras that have LCDs in them, to be honest, is the ability to do the program shift. So you turn on the camera, if it's in program mode, the camera picks the shutter speed and the aperture for you. But because you have this control on the front here, this up-down control, you can adjust that shutter speed aperture combination, maintaining the same exposure, but giving you either more or less bokeh or more or less blur from the shutter speed or the aperture. So that is a nice feature, and it's super quick to use on this camera because the control is right there. Now I'm going to talk about some of the things I don't necessarily like about the camera. And I always do this with my cameras. It's always a little bit nitpicky, but you know, it's a review. So there you go. First thing is, and the biggest thing I complain about all my cameras that don't have this, it doesn't have a depth of field preview. The thing about photography for me is it's all about depth of field. Depth, that's the depth of your focus. So you can blur the background, throw the background out of focus, and it really focuses on your subject matter. And it just allows you to, in my opinion, take great pictures. So typically cameras will have a button somewhere on the body that stops down the lens, and you can see what's going to be in focus and what's going to be out of focus when you take the picture. This camera's missing that, so that really bums me out about it, but you got to have some stuff, right? Number two is it uses a weird battery. So this battery is not a AA or a AAA. Whoops. It is a Energizer 0623A or 2CR5. It's just a weird battery. It's probably superior in charge time and other things to the other batteries, but the other batteries are easier to get. This thing, I don't know. I mean, I was able to find it on Amazon, but yeah. So it's the weird battery. The next thing I usually complain about on cameras, well, on this one I didn't talk about yet, is the fact that it uses a proprietary hot shoe. So you can't just stick any old flash on here. You've got to use a Minolta flash that's made for this camera. So there's probably, I don't even know, 3 to 10 lenses you could pick, or flashes you could pick from, but you can't just put any flash on here. So that is kind of limiting. This is a pretty full-featured advanced amateur camera. And by that I mean it has got a lot of features that tick the box for serious photographers. For instance, it's got all the modes, right? It's got the aperture priority, which is the way I shoot all my cameras that have aperture priority. It's got shutter priority. Of course, it's got manual mode, and it's got a program mode. It also has in the viewfinder what's called a full information viewfinder. And by that we mean you can see the shutter and the aperture and the focus indicator, and if it's in an exposure compensation setting, and if the flash is going. So you get all the information inside the viewfinder. You don't have to take your eye away and look down on the controls on top. The next thing it's got is it's got 2 focus areas, right? It's got a wider area and a more center area. And I've always used the center area on this one, but you have a choice. It's also got 2 meters. It's got the matrix meter and it's got the spot meter, which is awesome. The other thing, it's got a 1/125th second top flash sync, which is pretty good. And it's also got a 1/4000th of a second top shutter speed, which is very healthy. So the other thing is it's got, if you have the cards for it, you can do auto bracketing with a bracket card. You can do multi-spot metering with a multi-spot metering card. And then you can also you can save shot information like aperture and shutter speed and things like that to a different card. So that's pretty nice. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, hit the like button and think about subscribing. Thanks again.